Alrighty, welcome everyone to the first ever patch notes video for Valdrasil Voyage to Infinity. I am Provocative, the designer of this set, and I am fresh off week 1 of Field Test 8, a temporary format that is run in the Magic Set Editor Discord server that serves to test fledgling sets and prepare them for submission to other custom formats or simply help balance them for designer standards. Today I am going to be going over how Valdrasil Voyage to Infinity, I'm going to shorten that to VYI from now on because it's kind of a mouthful, how VYI performed for this first week, and going over the many balance changes after this testing period. And at the end, I will go over what I'm looking for the set for week 2. You can see a little hint of the changes coming up. I know this first page seems like it's going to be an equal amount of nerfs and buffs. It's going to be mostly nerfs because the set has come out overtuned. I'm not going to mince words here. It's been too strong. A lot of the cards were just way too much value or utility for their slot. They were just too cheap in many cases, and that is something that I'm going to be targeting heavily with this first patch notes. A couple upsides here. People do seem to like the aesthetics and mechanics of the set. Individual designs seem to interest people as well, but the overall level of balance is the main detractor from the set right now that I'm hoping to get fixed. Let's do a very quick overview of how the individual themes of the set performed. I kindly brought the main themes that were tested from Valdrasil. There's a couple more that weren't included here, but these are like the main things that we're focused on. So I just kind of wanted to go over the different mechanics here. The MDFCs, which are mobile double-faced cards, they are all creatures with a land on the back, and unfortunately, pretty much every single one of them at rare above, and many of the ones at uncommon, were just blatantly overtuned. The fact that they had a land on the backside was just not factored into the cost well enough, as we'll see later. So a lot of them are going to be receiving nerfs across the board. The storm mechanic, which was the one thing I was actually worried about going into this field test, has not performed up to par. I don't particularly mind this too much. Storm is a very volatile deck to have exist in a format. There are always a lot of opinions about it, so if this comes out slightly weaker, I'm okay with that. I think I am going to look into options for another week, for another field test, honestly, to buffing it, but for now, for this field test, for the remainder of this field test, I am focused on nerfing the set to a more reasonable level, so buffs will have to come at a later time. The Artifact deck was another deck that was a bit overtuned, not as much as the other two overtuned categories here, but there were definitely some outlier cards that we are going to address. The Tokens deck was just bonkers. It was a package that was overtuned, so we're going to be working on stripping back a lot of its power. A lot of the individual cards were just not okay, and in aggregate they were not okay. However, I do think they're going to need less work in general than just the mechanic of modal double-faced cards here. And then finally, we have the spacecraft mechanic, and I am actually very happy with how this landed. There are a couple spacecraft nerfs that are going to be in these patch notes, but they are not against the mechanic in general, which I think has performed pretty well. It's just a couple cards that were a little overtuned. I actually am quite happy with how spacecraft ended up compared to Edge of Eternities, where I feel they were a bit weak. I think I have hit mostly, for most of the spacecraft, the right balance of competitive viability. Alright, without further ado, let us get into individual card changes. So we're going to start off with white, with Ellen Beyond the Horizon. A staple of the Tokens deck, and unfortunately, she just came in over the mark. A 2-mana 1/1 that draws a card and grows was just a bit much. The rework is still preserving her ability to draw that card, though you no longer get to search for them from your graveyard or exile. So if you just run out of them in your library, you are going to be penalized now. I don't think that'll come up too often in decks that were running 4 copies of It Takes Two, but now in the decks that were only running 1 copy and just repeatedly using it, you are no longer going to be able to use that extra deck space for Ellen. You will need to run more copies. And now you also have to pay mana to put the counters on Ellen. This is going to basically slow her rate of growth, I wanted to make sure she still worked with It Takes Two played on curve after her, so she still is going to be a 3/3 with two 1/1s on turn 3. However, you're no longer going to be able to weave in multiple token creation events as easily as before, because that mana gate is going to come up. We're also getting a nerf to It Takes Two. This is a very minor change. It's going to go from, still has orbit 2, but the cost on that orbit is going to go to 5 white from 4 white. It Takes Two was not a card that needed to be nerfed by itself, but with Ellen, it was just a little too good. So it's going to be getting a small tap here. And I think these two changes in aggregate together will help reduce the package. Next, we have Automatic Reconstruction. This is not a card that anyone complained about by any means. However, I have recently soured on 4-mana Graveyard Reanimation for Rev-bound sets. I just don't think it's a good idea for the format in general while we have the tools that we have right now. Maybe in the future, if we lose stuff like Shigane Manor Burns or similar cards like that, I'll revisit this. But I have decided to bump up the card to 5 mana and basically open it up to getting any non-land permanent. So it is gaining some extra utility for that mana cost. This is still a card that I would say is nebulously constructed targeted, but this is still mainly a card that is mainly for the Spacecraft deck in Limited. However, if it does get picked up for constructed, I'm not against it. Drop Through Reality is getting a small change. Actually, two small changes. The first is that it's no longer going to be able to flicker artifacts. I don't think the card is actually broken with artifacts for constructed. However, I am printing a lot of Spacecraft with powerful ETBs. So being able to flick those in Limited has been painful. I've already had to add an If It Was Cast trigger to one of those Spacecraft ETBs just because of cards like this and other cards. So I'm just getting rid of the artifact side of it. It's now only going to flicker creatures, and then the orbit cost is also going to 3 white, because someone pointed out this is like Teleportation Circle, and I thought that's really correct, and I think if you flicker something 3 times with your Teleportation Circle, you're usually pretty happy, so I decided to nerf this to 4 mana. Again, not something that anyone really pointed out as being broken, but I just figured I would preempt the potential issue here. Freed's Purifier was another member of the tokens package that played a little too good. I think this design would probably be fine in a set that didn't have other very powerful token synergies, so we are nerfing it a little bit. It's going to go to a 2/1, and the token clause is now only going to work once a turn. This is still going to be a pretty decent slot in for your token decks, especially with that indestructible ability, but it's no longer going to be as powerful as before. Steel Frame Viridar was perhaps the strongest artifacts card in the set. There was really no good reason not to be running white if you wanted to be an artifacts deck just because of Steel Frame Viridar. It was not my intention for white to be such a strong pull over black because, as you may know, the set has both blue-white artifacts and blue-black artifacts, and I wanted both of them to kind of be equally have some equal utility. Blue-white was meant to be the more aggressive version of the deck, and blue-black was meant to be the more controlling version of the deck. However, white's tools were just so much better than black's tools, it wasn't even close. So Steel Frame Viridar is going to get a small rework. I'm not even sure if this could technically be considered a nerf for the specific artifacts aggro deck, because there's many cases where this will no longer you'll pay less than 3 for the exhaust ability. So I could see this being even stronger in artifacts aggro, which would be something to keep an eye on. But I do think as a general white 1-drop, I've seen it being played in pretty much just white weenies in general. I do not want it to be such a card. So it is no longer going to be showing up in those lists. Valahart Rescuer, not my card. It was designed by good old Schwa77. I think that's how you pronounce that. Had some issues with another card in the set that will be showing up later in the list. But this ETB was just proving to be a little too powerful when cheated out with pod effects, because you could just bring back whatever you sacrificed with the Rescuer and trigger the ETB again. So it is getting in, again, if it was cast trigger, to help reduce the power of that ETB. It is still going to have that power if played fairly on curve, but specifically pod shenanigans and like reanimator shenanigans and stuff, they're not going to be working with this card anymore. Moving on to blue, we're going to start with Repel Aggression. It is a instant counterspell. You can counter target spell, draw a card from the top 3 and bin the rest, or do both if your expanse is 5 or greater. I do think there is actually a place for a scaling counterspell like this, when perhaps in Revolution's earlier power levels there's not before. This is the type of card that normally I would balk at, but now we have stuff like Unravel Thoughts, which is a counterspell that can draw a card under certain conditions, and I think that seed could be explored more. This still is getting a small tap to only look at the top 2 instead of the top 3, and I will reevaluate if it needs further minor changes, but I think the seed has potential. Chronicler's Probe, it was a mistake on my part. The card was always intended to be 2 mana, and it unfortunately just... Well, actually, I'm really not sure what happened. I have made a promo art version of this card. That promo art version was 2 mana before field test even started. I first thought of this card while in class and wrote down the idea in my notebook, and that was 2 mana. So I'm not really sure how this came in as 1 mana. At the moment I found out, I dead horsed it. So the card is now correctly 2 mana like it was always meant to be, and I'm looking forward to testing it in artifact shells. Starwell Crossing. This was a card that played pretty well, honestly. It was the ramp target that I always imagined it would be. 7 mana to bounce everything and then start generating game-winning threats. Pretty much exactly as how I wrote it up. However, a lot of this set, again, is about playing big stuff, and cheating it in early is scary. Stuff like Reanimator cards or Flicker cards absolutely bust this wide open. So I have decided to just add an if it was cast trigger. Again, no one really complained about this one, but we're preempting. Alright, this is going to be one of the very few buffs from this patch. And I don't even know if I call this a buff. This is more of a rework. But Herald of Nothing was a card that was nerfed prior to being entering field test. So it was one of the cards we actually caught that was overtuned. And the left side is the version that was actually tested in field test. It did okay, but it was not what I envisioned for the card, which was it to be a powerful Aristocrats 1-drop. So, hence the rework. I'm not sure if this is going to be, again, a powerful Aristocrats 1-drop, but it's a 1-drop again, which is the main thing that I wanted. This is going to ping your opponents when you sacrifice your treasure tokens, when you sacrifice your creatures, and especially when you sacrifice your artifact creatures. They get pinged twice. So this is kind of what I was envisioning, like an artifact Aristocrats deck, and this is hopefully going to be the linchpin of such a strategy, and will be something I am testing in week 2. Void Beast's Fury. This was not a card anyone complained about. It's not really a constructed card. This was instead a change for VYI's limited format, so there would be more answers to the mythic rare god cards, which are all indestructible. Void Beast Fury previously could, I think, only kill... It could not kill any of them, which was not ideal. So now it does kill all of them. The main thing that this card is also going to be targeting is that if the gods for some reason become an issue in constructed, I say for some reason because they're literally all on this list for receiving nerfs, but if they for some reason become an issue in constructed, we now have this niche removal piece for them as well. And I went ahead and decided to slap Avatar and Demigods on there as well, because why not? Void Potentate? Void something was a little too good of a Aristocrats piece. A Cursed Marauder is a Modern Horizons 3 card that has seen some play, and this is pretty much strictly better than it. So it is getting nerfed to 3 mana and getting the artifact typing, which I am now noticing there is not a space between artifact and creature, so I'll have to fix that. But it is getting nerfed to 3 mana and gaining the artifact type to give blue-black artifacts a little more edge over blue-white. I mean, I'm assuming they would appreciate a Fleshbag Marauder. Next up, we have Covet Infinity. This one was a card that I was hesitant about changing because in my experience, it hasn't actually been that debilitating. However, the discard deck in Valdrasil Voyage to Infinity is a thing that is somewhat supported by other cards in the set. So I don't really want to have situations where you, I don't know, duress turn 1, then orbit Covet Infinity on turn 2 and strip 2 more cards from their hand. It was always intended to be Covet Infinity, Orbited or not would be the first hand hate spell of the game that you play. And unfortunately, the existence of cards like Duress make that a little difficult. So Covet Infinity is going to go to 3 mana for the Orbit cost. I still think it's probably a good card. 1 mana for a hand hate spell has always been the bar, and you still have access to that, and now you have the modality of getting to do it twice. So I think this card still has potential. Decimator Legion. So blue-black artifact, as I said, was not as strong as blue-white. However, it did have 1 ace in the hole, and that was Decimator Legion, which was very strong. So it is getting nerfed to 3 mana, where it's going to be a little more appropriate. I still think the card probably has pretty good legs, even at 3 mana. And it's getting opponent toughness too, so there you go. Little bonus on the top. Void Twisted Valkyrie was a card that seemed to be pretty well liked. However, it was just that little bit too difficult to remove, so it is losing a point of toughness, and its ward is getting swapped out for pay 3 life. This is a card that's still going to have pretty good utility in your average black deck. Against aggro, it'll help sustain your life total, and against control, it'll draw you cards. What's not to like? I think the ward discarded card will be missed, but the card still has potential without it. Mechanized Propagator. This was a card that had just like the slightest bit overtuned, so I am deciding to move the orbit cost to 4 mana. I think the card probably still has legs despite that, and it has 6 legs. Oh god, please don't let me make puns. It has legs despite its nerf, and I expect it to still be a solid piece of any Artifact Aristocrats deck, or Aristocrats deck in general. Sun Eater Nautiloid is going to lose the attack trigger that it once had on that very first line. Sun Eater Nautiloid was just a little too effective at devouring your opponent's board. Even now, it's just still going to be a 2-mana edict that eventually lets you get the creature you killed or swing in with a 4/4 in the air, which are both great utility for a 2-mana sorcery edict. So I am still happy where this card is, even if it no longer is a Titan. And finally, for black, we have Zander, Anomaly Analyst. This was the black planeswalker of the set that was part of the mono-black discard package that I mentioned earlier with Covet Infinity. And Zander actually played pretty well. Most people agreed that he was pretty balanced. However, there was a note that there was just a little bit too much disparity between when his +1 was online, per se, when you could draw a card, and when it wasn't online, when your opponent lost 1 life. So now it's going to be a little closer in that when it's online, you have to pay 1 life to draw a card. So the disparity between them will be a bit lessened. Moving on to red, this is not going to be too long. Red cards have actually been pretty balanced overall. We're actually going to start with a buff. All Hands on Deck was not a card that saw any play. However, one playtester made a request that it worked with any cost that required you to tap a creature. So now it does. Here we go. Null-Forged Executioner is also getting a small buff / rework in that its stats are getting shifted from 4/2 to 3/3. This is because I was informed that red 3-drops, if they have 2 toughness, they're really just not going to see play. So I decided to switch this to a 3/3 to see if it gave the card better chances of having a slot in red main boards or sideboards. I'm not confident this card is going to see play. It is a 3-drop that does nothing actively proactive, which in a mono-red aggro deck is pretty much death. But I do think it still has some potential, so I am going to give it a shot at 3/3. And the final change, actually I don't remember if it's a final change, there might be one more, but the final change for red is Brigand's Tanker. It had some, I don't want to say odd interactions because they do work, odd interactions between excess damage and damage setting that the second ability does. So I decided to swap it to a bolt, which is because it's a lot easier to calculate what the damage would be with the second ability with a bolt instead of a flame spill effect. And the bolt can now go face, but it again, it only does deal 3 instead of 4. So small changes here. And then I also gave it the ability to kill some of the gods in the set. 3 damage now kills, I believe, I want to say 2 of the gods in the set. So that is some small utility that Brigand's Tanker is getting. And then it also lost a point of power on the animated mode, which makes the damage setting a little less potent, and now it also only sets non-combat damage. So this is a myriad of small nerfs to the card. I expect it to still see play, but not be perhaps quite as much of an auto-clued in mono red decks as before. Oh, yep, okay, we did have one more red card. I just put it in the wrong alphabetical order here. This is not a card that's actually getting a buff or a nerf. It is merely getting a more clear wording change, so it is clear that you can only play cards with it that were exiled this turn. There were people who were playing cards that were exiled on prior turns if you dealt non-combat damage this turn, and I don't know. But now it is hopefully a little more clear for the people who were confused. Moving on to green, Might of the Machine is getting a small nerf. Well, technically, it's getting a nerf and a change. It no longer gives Trample, which I was looking at this card and I realized I don't think this should probably be giving Trample on top of all the buffs it's going to be giving. It's kind of a lot for a 1-mana spell in a Storm deck. And I know I'm nerfing the Storm deck when I said it was undertuned, but this is not exactly how I envisioned the Storm deck winning. So this is going to be getting changed, and it's hopefully going to push it back to being more of a limited card. And it's also getting a small wording clarification that it's now only going to cast a number of spells cast before it this turn to match other Storm payoffs in the set. Call the Infinite Bridge. This is, I don't think, was on anyone's radar, and no one touched it. But upon rereading it, it's kind of insane. Putting 2 creatures into play off the top of your library and putting 4 counters among them was kind of wild. So I changed it to any permanent card off the top. You now look at the top 6 instead of the top 4, and you can distribute any sort of counters among the permanents. Or 4 counters of any kind, or not any kind, but 4 counters of charge, loyalty, or +1/+1 among the permanents you control. So it's still a similar seed, but quite less blatantly insane as it was before. And I'm surprised no one picked it up. But I mean, there's there's like 21,000 cards in every pool, so like, I'm not surprised if some really good cards go under the radar for week 1. Another green card that did not go under the radar was Titan of Helgraham. This was a card that basically just slotted right into big mana decks, and it really just functioned as a haste anthem that also grew your board. That was also a 7/7 trampler with haste that also made your board into mana darks. You see what I'm saying? It's a lot. So it is keeping some of that utility. It's still going to be a 5-mana 7/7 trampler when your expanse is online. However, the expanse is going to 12 or greater to really incentivize you to build a wide board. And it is losing the haste, so you can't just drop it and another big creature in the late game and just swing in for a bunch. But the rest of it is being kept the same, so it is still a possibility for ramp-ish decks. And then we have Amid, another Planeswalker showing up on the list. Amid actually played really well. I was really happy with where she ended up. However, I thought it was a little awkward that you could put multiple Keen Sense tokens on one creature. That wasn't my intention. So I went ahead and changed it so you can no longer attach it to in creatures you control that are already enchanted with another aura. So this is a small nerf. You can't really play her in Boggles anymore or whatever, but I think she'll still land pretty well for your average deck. Moving on to colorless, my favorite card personally in the set, I think. There's a lot of options, but this is one of my favorites for sure. Drakenfell, first star carve, performed slightly better than expected. I did know it was often going to animate itself with the 2/1, but I did underestimate how often it was going to be animated on turn 3 instead of turn 4 as I originally intended. So the card now is going to 8+ charge counters to animate instead of 6+ charge counters, and it's also losing Menace because this originally asked for you to deal combat damage to a player, so the Menace was part of that, but now it's literally only going to be used to push more damage, which I don't think you need on your value colorless card. So it's losing Menace, and it's a little harder to animate now, but I still expect it to be a very powerful colorless option as originally intended. Icarium Perfect Mind is getting what I hesitantly call a buff. Before he entered with counters equal to the amount of mana spent to cast him, which was a commander-oriented line of text, because this was pretty much one of the only colorless commanders you could run in the set before they did the spacecraft thing for Edge of Eternities, where they could be your commander. So now he just is going to enter with X +1/+1 counters on him. This is a nerf for the commander version of the card, but a buff for the cost reduction cards in this set that previously reduced his cost, but he didn't care because he only cared about the mana spent to cast him. So now he's going to work a little better with those. Lightless Star of Oblivion. I don't think anyone had any issues with this card, but it was more just something about the play pattern of it kind of bothered me. So to go over what the change is, it's still, on the final ability, when it attacks, it gains control of 3 lands. Before, it had you set the player's life total to the number of lands they control. Now they lose life equal to the number of lands you control that they own. I was finding that Lightless was swinging in, gaining control of the lands, and then just killing them with combat damage. It didn't happen very often because Lightless is very hard to crew, being a 5-mana spacecraft, and then asking 12 power on top of that. But it was, when it did happen, it felt so unsatisfying, because I want to use the lands I just stole, but I can't because I just beat them to death with my spacecraft after setting their life total to like 4 or 5. So now, Lightless is just going to ping them on top of swinging in. Sometimes you'll still kill them, but now you'll hopefully get to untap and use their lands at least once or twice. This isn't a nerf to like the card's constructed playability, because I'm not even sure if it is constructed playable, to be honest. I didn't play it a few times and it did okay. But that's the whole point, is that I want it to be more fun. It killed a little too fast after it was animated, and you needed to revel in the power of stealing your opponent's lands. So now you do good to do a little bit of reveling. Moving on to multicolored, we're going to start with Asbial Star-Touched. The Viridar Warlock unfortunately came in a little too hot and heavy. The double prowess was an issue. He was growing a little too fast, so we have nerfed that down to just one singular instance of prowess. And then he did break with a lot of 1-mana flicker spells, so now he is getting, once again, a if it was cast type writer. So he is no longer going to be doing the infinite flickers issue here. Kilira, or Celira, I haven't decided yet. Celira, Dawn Unbroken, was just a little too good at just locking the game down by tapping your whole board and getting a Mega Displacer Kitten trigger. So I decided that I wanted to keep the Mega Displacer Kitten trigger and instead give her and the boards, and your board, some sort of weird hexproof-ish / ward-ish trigger. That is on Hinata Dawncrowned as well. Because if you're going to be exiling your whole board, you want your opponent to pay a little more mana to target your whole board. So yeah, I think this will probably still keep her as a powerful 6-mana bomb, but you do now actually need to spend 1 turn to untap with her before you start going crazy with her. And then she also no longer flickers lands, so I wanted to also mention that. This was also, first of all, flickering lands was a constructed issue because it helped you go infinite with her when that was not intended to be an avenue of infinite combo for her. I wanted it to be more with like mana rocks and stuff, if that happened. But it was also an issue because a lot of the MDFCs in this set are lands on the backside, so if you flicker them, they come back as a creature, and I do not want to promote that interaction in the set whatsoever. So these are the changes to her to prevent that. All right, next we have Chronicler's Directive. This was another of the blue-white cards that pushed you towards blue artifacts over blue-black artifacts. So this is getting a couple minor changes to bring it more in line. The counterspell mode is now going to instead counter the spell unless they pay 1 for each artifact you control. Philippe suggested that. Excellent suggestion. Super flavorful for the card. I don't know why I didn't think of it. It was a great call. And then the token that the card creates is now going to enter tapped, so it's no longer a flash blocker. Pretty minor changes all around, but I think the card will still be potent without being busted. Oh boy. Okay. Arguably the most broken single-faced card in the set. Freitas was just a absolute must answer. Kill this immediately. Don't even let your opponent attack with their 1-drop, because otherwise you are going to get screwed. Freitas was way too good for a 2-drop, and even as a 3-drop, I have my eye on her. But yeah, she's going to 3 mana with no other changes. So we are going to see if that puts her a little more in line. And then I do believe this is our last single-faced card we're going to go over. I have made a whole section for the MDFCs, but I think Captain Ile fittingly, is our last multicolored card. Let me just check. Nope. Okay. Captain Eli is our second to last multicolored card. Correction. Captain Eli, he has performed very well. I did want him to be a strong staple of the set, so that is good. However, he's performed it slightly too well, as is the norm for a lot of cards in the set. So I'm administering a very small change at the moment, with more to come later if needed. But the -X is going from dealing twice X damage to a creature or planeswalker to X damage to anything. So this means instead of being able to -2 to deal 4 damage to a creature, which would previously be pretty good for a 4-drop planeswalker, now he will be able to do only 2 damage to any target for the same loyalty cost. So this is definitely a nerf to his ability to control the board. He's still going to have a lot of potency in Storm-esque or Spellslinger strategies, but a little less power in being a controlling planeswalker, which is good. He's not exactly a controlling character, so I think the focusing on the Storm side of him is a lot more apt. Okay, the actual last multicolored card of the set is a complete rework to Leif, Hero of Valdrasil, our secondary protagonist of the set. So previously, Leif just played a bit awkwardly in that you wanted to stagger your land drops, and this was like an expanse thing, but it didn't quite work out the way I wanted. So instead, she's getting completely changed to lean more into the Berserker, Knight, Soldier, Warrior, typal vibe that she had going on before. So now she, every time a land control enters, you can play a Berserker, Knight, Soldier, or Warrior from your yard with a finality counter on it, or grant all your Berserker, Knight, Soldiers, and Warriors +1/+1 haste until end of turn. So she's going to be like a typal glue for a lot of different archetypes that normally don't overlap. And I'm interested to see where she lands. I'm definitely keeping an eye on her. She could definitely come out too strong. Both the Anthem and the ability to play cards from the yard could potentially be really good. So it is, like I said, something to be keeping a close eye on. Okay, moving on to DFCs. This is going to be a long section because, as I said before, a lot of them were just blatantly undercosted. So, starting with perhaps the one DFC on this list that no one really had an issue with, Blazing Meteors. This card's fine. On either way, I would have been fine with its balance. However, I decided that it would be really sad if you couldn't make a 5/5, which would be the max size elemental token, off this from just the card itself. So I decided to nerf it to 5 mana. So now you can live the dream of making the biggest token possible with this card that it could allow. But yeah, it's otherwise, I doubt it'll continue to... I doubt it'll cause issues because it didn't cause any issues before, so we'll see. Oh boy. Okay. Chaos Worm. Award for perhaps the most broken card in the set. Which is funny because it was not designed for Constructed. I'm definitely going to get some flack for that. But this was a Reanimator cheat target that cheated out more Reanimator and cheat stuff. The card was just so strong when cheated out early. So I pushed it. I nerfed it a couple different ways. It's losing trample. It's going to a 5/5 instead of a 6/6 stat line, and it now has the if it was cast. I don't know if this is enough. I'm going to be honest. This could absolutely need more changes, but I do think it's testable. I wanted it for ramp decks mainly, and now it's pretty much only for ramp decks, so that works for me. It's just going to be finding out if I need to administer further changes to this. Okay. Doombreaker Worm had one specific application in that it granted haste to a board of big creatures after being played. This pool had a lot of ways to generate a ton of mana, so Doombreaker Worm was basically just that big board you just made. You can now attack with it this turn, and also your creatures get like a +5/+0 Anthem or whatever. So I am nerfing the card, so now it just gives the Anthem. I think it still has utility. I mean, it is MDFC that fixes 2 colors of mana. That's pretty good. So I think it'll still have utility without granting that haste Anthem. False God Interface came in a little too hot, a bit too good of a 2-mana removal spell. I am nerfing it a bit, so it's no longer going to be able to target artifacts, and now it doesn't hit tapped creatures, it only hits attacking creatures. This could honestly not be enough. This is still a card that's going to see a lot of play in many decks, and it's up to testing to see if that's just too much. but I do think this is a significant step down from where it was before. Speaking of cards that were way too much, Seek the Last Light was cited as a card that would be really good even without the land on the backside. So I have applied 2 nerfs to the card. 1, it's going from an instant to a sorcery, and 2, it now only looks at the top 3. So I think these are changes that are going to help bring the card in line to where it's supposed to be. I think it could definitely still be too good. There are cards that are cost similar to this that have seen play before without having a land backside. So I'm going to have to test this to see if it's more okay. But I do think it is now more in line with what you would expect an MDFC to cost. Brightheart Serpent. So the power fantasy of this card, of doubling your board's power and toughness multiple times, landed perfectly. Unfortunately, that perfectly was way too freaking good. So the card has been nerfed to no longer do that. Now it can only double 1 creature's power and toughness per landfall trigger. So you can still double your entire board, you just need to hit enough landfall triggers. And you can also just target itself a couple times. That's probably even better value. I still think the card is pretty potent as like a top end for a lands deck, especially since it has a land on the backside. But it's going to be a little less effective in just absolutely ending the game instantly. And now it'll be more, you need to stop this before it kills you, which is a little more effective for a 7-drop rather than just, this is a 7-drop that kills you like that. Domesticated Void Beast. This was a 2-mana looter that was also a land, so that was a bit too much. So now it's a 3-mana looter that's also a land. Not much more to go over here. Was just too good, and now hopefully it's more online. Rusted Moontrotter. So I don't know what on earth I was thinking for this card. Beza, that triggers multiple times throughout the game and is also a land, is absolutely something that is not in the realm of okay. So I've administered multiple nerfs to this card. It went to 5 mana, it lost a point of toughness, and now you have to choose which mode you want from the various Beza modes here. It honestly still could be too good. I mean, it gains a lot of life, it can go really wide, it can draw you cards, but these are all, of course, still dependent on your opponent to do things, and now it's a little less debilitating because you don't get to do all of them. So I'm hoping this puts it more in line. The MDFCs are cards I want to see play because they help sustain the game and make it go on a bit longer, which is what I envisioned for the set, long battle cruiser-esque games. But when the cards are just dominatingly powerful, they don't make long games, they just make the game all about them. And that is not what I envisioned for these cards. Okay. Home stretch. The Gods cycle in VYI was a cycle of gods that were double-sided cards that had an ability on the backside on the land, besides just the mana abilities. Every single one of these cards is being changed. Esmond here is the only one who's not being changed because of power levels. He actually just came in like, okay. Like, he was good, don't get me wrong, but I think that the change is going to make him a lot more fun. So Esmond here is, well, small spoiler, all the gods are getting changed to have tap abilities. This in part helps them not trigger on the turn they come down, which was an issue for some of them. Oda. And now they're going to be a little more of a investment, you know? Esmond's getting a nerf to his stats. He's going from a 4/6 to a 3/5. This is happening to a lot of the gods that were 3-drops. Their stats were just a little too high on the curve. So now they're getting a change downwards. And before, he could just repeatedly grab the same card back. So now with the tap ability, it's worded in a way that you can no longer grab the same card back, so you're going to be casting that card, which makes it difficult to get into your library without casting it. Into your graveyard without casting it. So, this is the only change that I don't really think is a nerf. It's more just a side grade. And he didn't really need a nerf, so that's helpful. He's just going to be a lot more fun to play with now, hopefully. Alright, moving on to Freed, Shard of Light. She was just a little... oh, excuse me. Oh my god. Oof. She was just a little too effective in creating those token boards. She came online just a little too fast. So I'm going to choose to still have her come online pretty fast, She's going to get a small tap to her stats to a 4/3, so she'll be killed by a couple more -X or Brigand's Tanker-esque effects. And now the token creation event can only be changed once a turn. So unfortunately, with cards like Freed's Purifier, Freed herself is not going to be so much help for those anymore. Yeah, I think this is probably one of the less impactful changes, because I think Freed was pretty close to being all right. She was just a bit too much, so hopefully this will bring her more in line. Speaking of cards that are all right, this is not one of them. Inga was arguably one of the strongest gods. I think it's a tie between her and Oda. But when she came down, and then you followed up with any 3-drop to go get Valahart Rescuer or some other disgusting thing, it was absolutely gross. Not to mention the dormant cards from Godspine were just filthy with Inga. So she is getting a change to 4 mana, and now her ability is a tap ability and can only be activated once each turn. This is a change I don't make lightly. I don't think this will dumpster the card. I think she's still quite good as a indestructible creature. Prime Speaker Vanifar from Ravnica Allegiance does a very similar effect, and she was always weak because she was weak to removal. Inga is not as weak to removal, so I could see her being a bit more potent there. And then, of course, she is also a land on the backside, so there are upsides here. However, she also doesn't have pod lines, because once you untap her, she can't be activated again. So I'm going to have to see if this helps bring her in line. Okay. Oda. This was, her and Inga were fighting to see who was the most broken. I dead-horsed Oda a lot quicker than Inga, because I wanted to see Inga without the dormant cards. So maybe that's a point for Oda. But Oda basically just killed people way too fast. The discarding and sacrificing was just it came on too fast. You could play your turn 3, swing in with a 2-drop, make your opponent lose life. They have to discard a sacrifice, repeat it next turn. Now they're below 10 life. You can start swinging with Oda, and she has 6 power, so she's ending games very fast. And it was all too much. She was a little too aggressive. So she's getting a tap to 5/3, and now she has to tap to force your opponent to discard a card to sacrifice an online permanent. Or lose the game, but I don't know why they would do that. Oh, and then another change is she's getting renamed to Kaya instead of Oda. Kaya without a Y, because Oda is a name of a creature from Kitsuo Dusk of Time, another of my sets, and I completely forgot about that. So Kaya here has gotten a new name, and we should all be very supportive. Kaya is now going to be much less aggressive. You can't tap her the turn she comes down to force your opponent to discard or sack like you could with Oda before. And now Kaya also has to choose between attacking or forcing the sack/discard later in the game. And she now only counts your opponent having half their starting life total instead of yourself, so you can't play her as a defensive tool either. So all these changes will hopefully bring Kaya in line. It's a lot of nerfs here, so hopefully makes her a bit more balanced. Whew. Okay, we have reached the final card of the review. Viola, Shard of Creation, my favorite of the God Cycle, is the only one that wasn't causing massive issues, so good for her. Unfortunately, she did break a little bit with flickers, though you would have to have a non-creature spell cast outlet, which I don't really think anyone teched into that. But that would have been an option, so the new wording no longer allows it. And she's really only getting a change to match the rest of the gods, and then she's also getting a small toughness tap as well, because just to mirror Freed's 4/3 stat line, Viola's getting a 3/4 stat line. Yeah, but it was a change that was mostly just to keep her in line with the other gods. I'm willing to test her further, because she's really the only god besides Esmond that didn't get a lot of testing. So I think once she gets a little more focus, she might reveal that maybe she's completely broken. We'll see. But as of right now, minor change here. Okay. In closing for this patch, it was 49 card changes, which is a lot. The set was blatantly overtuned before, and now hopefully it's a lot more balanced. I will still be taking feedback over the next few days. I wanted to release this video early into the review period, so if people have issues or criticisms with any of the changes I've applied in this list, they can bring them up, and I please encourage you to do so. I absolutely love talking about my cards, even when they're broken. So please let me know if you think a change isn't enough or you want to suggest another change. I am going to be releasing a patch notes soon after this video, and then another one with people's recommendations after that if they come in. Whew. Okay, that was a fun little recording session. I'm going to go ahead and sign off here, and I'm hoping to see you all in week 2, where hopefully VYI isn't as commanding and we can see some cool stuff from other sets, along with the reworked cards from VIY getting a chance to prove that they are fun in addition to being no longer broken. All right, I am going to head out. Ciao.